With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, we're joined by Representative Dan Kildee of Michigan. We're talking about keeping Mexico accountable for what they agreed to in the USMCA. But we start today with a discussion on aquaculture. Joining us now is Drew Winters, campaign manager for Stronger America Through Seafood. All right, let's start out with telling our listeners a little bit about Stronger America Through Seafood. What is the organization itself?
So Stronger America Through Seafood is an industry coalition that represents companies across the seafood supply chain working in support of expanded U.S. aquaculture, particularly aquaculture in federal waters in the U.S. And we do that through regulatory action and also through legislative action.
So you recently sent a letter in support of several aquaculture objectives that have been incorporated into an implementation plan released by NOAA Fisheries. Tell me a little bit about it.
So NOAA recently released the National Seafood Strategy Implementation Plan, and we were very pleased to see that expansion of U.S. aquaculture was prominently featured as one of the 4 goals in that plan. Previously, SATS had sent a comment letter as NOAA solicited feedback on the draft plan. So we were particularly pleased to see that NOAA intends to both included offshore aquaculture in that plan, but also accelerating progress on implementing an efficient, predictable, timely, and science-based regulatory framework for offshore aquaculture. We think that is really key to expansion of aquaculture generally, but especially important to achieving a real offshore aquaculture finfish industry in the U.S.
So are there some key areas of aquaculture development that you think are the most crucial or most critical for growth in the U.S. seafood industry?
So I think NOAA's work on the aquaculture opportunity areas is really important to regulatory efficiency, really doing some of that environmental work on the front end. So as farmers come in and want to put farms in offshore waters, having some of that environmental work already done really reduces the time and the cost to farmers to getting a farm in the water. So we're really pleased to see their work on that. We're also pleased to see development of science-based tools. That's something that they want to continue, and we think that's very important, both to the social license for aquaculture in U.S. federal waters, but also just to make sure that we're getting it right here. SATS really strongly believes that we should have a sustainable U.S. aquaculture industry, and that means making sure that we truly can be environmentally sustainable for the future in the face of climate change, but also to make sure there are no unintended impacts on the ecosystem. We fully believe that aquaculture can be done well and done right here. And so we really appreciate the focus on those science-based tools.
And then talking about the science, let's go into that just a little bit more. The National Seafood Strategy Implementation Plan talks about the need for continued investment in aquaculture science. So what kind of research or studies do you think are needed more to address the environmental impacts of aquaculture?
That's funny that you asked that. There's a lot of misinformation out there about the environmental impacts of offshore aquaculture. I'm not sure that more studies need to be done. There's been a lot that's been put out there, but there continues to be a belief by some, and some information continues to be put out there that perhaps purposefully misrepresents the science. And so I'm not sure that we actually need that from a scientific perspective, but the public needs that to feel confident in the environmental sustainability of offshore aquaculture.
Is there anything that can be done to combat the misinformation that's out there?
Organizations like the American Fisheries Society, a group of fishery scientists, continues to put out information that shows the latest science and research on the environmental impacts. SATS continues to try and educate lawmakers, particularly on Capitol Hill, about the latest science and research as well. And so other organizations, particularly feed organizations that really know what's going into their feed and the science, the cutting edge science around feed inputs, it's really important to continue to educate lawmakers around that.
From what I understand, the US is top 20 when it comes to aquaculture production, but we're used to being better than that. Not necessarily top 20, but it's the US. We want to be top one. But so what can we do to improve the competitiveness for American aquaculture and just our use of it in general?
And so US ranks 18th in aquaculture production. And really the only way to close that gap is really through expanding into offshore waters. Just the vast majority of the seafood that the US is bringing in is from somewhere else. And so really to close that gap and to be in charge of our seafood supply, to have food security for the climate benefits, we really need to be growing our own seafood here. And there's not a whole lot of space in coastal waters to do that. And land-based production really just can't produce the same amount of seafood that offshore aquaculture can with minimal environmental impacts. And so we really think that offshore aquaculture is the best and the only way to close that gap.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. On the phone with us is Drew Winters with Stronger America Through Seafood. We'll continue the conversation right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
On the phone with us this morning, Drew Winters with Stronger America Through Seafood. And there's so much talk eating healthy and improving the American diet, and we're taking a closer look at the way that we are eating. And obviously, seafood, it has such high nutrition and can be so good for us. What are some ways to make this, I want to say more accessible, but that's not necessarily right. But what are some ways to bring aquaculture more into the forefront for the average American?
Most Americans get their seafood from restaurants, right? It was only when the pandemic happened that people were cooking seafood more at home. And so chefs have done really a lot in terms of educating restaurant goers in terms of where they're getting their seafood and rely heavily on aquaculture seafood in restaurants. And Americans can learn more about where their seafood is coming from, and we can do a better job of helping to educate consumers about where they're getting their seafood from. Look, if we're not growing it here, it is coming from somewhere else. And as the need for seafood grows, more and more of that will come from aquaculture. If we don't grow it here, it's going to come from somewhere else in the world. Some countries have very high environmental standards. Other countries do not. We know that here in the US, we will have very strict environmental standards to producing our food systems, particularly aquaculture is held to a very high standard for environmental impacts. And we welcome that, right? And we want to be filling that gap here in the US.
Improving our aquaculture here in the US, could this have an effect overall on our economy, on the food security for the nation?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. If you look at our coastal communities, they're really suffering. Their fish stocks are moving. They're catching less and less. They're having to go further out to get their seafood. And coastal communities who have traditionally relied on fishing are really suffering. If you just look at it from that perspective, the opportunity to bring additional jobs and sources of revenue, tax revenue to those communities is huge. On top of that, aquaculture brings an infusion of investment in working waterfronts and portside infrastructure. We're seeing processing facilities closing across working waterfronts, old infrastructure, the need to really reinvest and revitalize working waterfronts. And that can all come from the expansion of US aquaculture. In addition, you can see benefits across the country. So in areas that are producing the ingredients into feed, so there's jobs across the seafood supply chain that can come from expanded aquaculture.
And aquaculture is not an easy industry to get into, especially here in the US. It seems like there are a lot of hurdles, a lot of permitting issues. Can you go into a little bit about some of the permitting process in the US? Is this difficult for people to get through?
So the process is long and expensive and difficult. And there are a lot of environmental regulations that a farmer has to comply with. And we think it is absolutely essential to have environmental requirements. But Where we see a problem is that a farmer can go into the permitting process and never find their way through the permitting process. You can't run a business on that. You can't get investors when you cannot get through the permitting process. Not a single finfish farm in 30 years of trying has successfully made it through the permitting process in federal waters. I believe there's one seaweed farm that has made it through the process in offshore waters, but not a single finfish farm. There is an operating farm in U.S. state waters in Hawaii, Blue Ocean Mariculture, a successful operation, high environmental standards, delicious product. It's one single farm, and that's in state waters, not in federal waters. So you can't expect investment in a business when it is impossible to make it through the permitting process. A farmer has to get through two big permits. That is the permit from the Corps of Engineers, the Rivers and Harbors permit, to moor a structure to the water bottom. And then you have to get an NPDES permit from the EPA. That's the discharge permit for the clean water permit. And so between those two, unfortunately, those processes are not coordinated. We're very pleased to see NOAA playing a role in some permits to try and move those through and to facilitate that process. We're very supportive of that. And we're very pleased to see that they included that in the Seafood Strategy Implementation Plan. But the U.S. needs to be doing more, and we're really supportive of federal legislation to help to give some regulatory certainty there and to ensure that a farmer can get through the process. If he gets in the process, he needs to be able to get out of the process.
All right. So, overall, what would be the take home message that you really hope our listeners are getting from this and that you want them to understand about aquaculture?
Aquaculture is the best, least climate intensive way to produce our food here in the US, our protein supply. It is essential that we expand offshore aquaculture here in the US, both for the climate benefits, for the economic benefits, for the food security benefits. And we really support the passage of federal legislation to help establish offshore farms in US waters. It's not a question of if it's going to happen, it's when. But in the meantime, we continue to get our seafood from somewhere else. So if you think that you're not eating farm seafood, you most likely are. And we would really like to see some progress here in the US, and we think it's essential for public health, food security, and climate benefits.
Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate you having me.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. Let's talk about LEP. What are the key benefits of your products for farmers in the Western Zone?
So Live Earth Products, we mine and manufacture a ingredient called humate. Now, humate is rich in organic acids called humic acid and fulvic acid. Now, those are common components in your soil organic matter. And here in the Western United States, unlike those places around the Mississippi going east, actually have very low organic matter. Now, your organic matter is key think of it as the pantry in the soil. So it's key to water retention, nutrient retention, nutrient cycling, microbial activity, those kind of things. So anything that's going to impact the increase in soil organic matter will also impact things like water holding capacity and nutrient holding capacity, which is a big deal here in the West when water is not as abundant as it is in the east side of the United States.
Now, what about nitrate? I know nitrate can be a problem in some soils. So how do LEP products help reduce the nitrate problem on saturated soils?
So Live Earth Products, it's not unique in how we affect nitrogen, but any organic matter will help retain nitrogen. So typically the mechanisms that we use are blending the nitrogen with the humate. So what happens is the nitrogen will attach to the humic acid, and you will see less of the processes that degrade or volatilize nitrogen. So nitrogen will either convert to a gas, or it'll be converted by microbes into a nitrate and leach to the soil. So the longer you have that product is not being volatilized or converted, the longer opportunity for that nutrient to be used by the plant. We have university testing that has shown that when you blend these organic acids with the nutrient, you give that plant a longer opportunity to use that nutrient before it's lost, volatilized, or converted.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Joining us for this segment on the phone now, Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan. We're going to talk about USMCA. To start off, thank you again for taking a few minutes out of your schedule. I appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
I wanted to talk to you about the USMCA in Mexico and a letter that you recently sent. To start out, tell us a little bit about, let's catch our listeners up on why this letter was important to send and what was in it.
Well, a few years ago, the president of Mexico, now the former president, President Lopez Obrador, began the process of denying imports of American corn on the basis that it was GMO corn and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. Of course, we know the science doesn't support that decision, number one. Neither does our current trade agreement, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement. It does not allow for them to use these non-science barriers to prevent corn, US corn, from being exported into Mexico. This is really a cultural issue for President Lopez Obrador. He wanted to protect local growers. We already negotiated a trade agreement. If he wanted to do that, we would have negotiated in good faith to come up with a way to make sure that our growers have access to markets and do it consistent with his interest. But we can't negotiate an agreement and then suddenly block a product that the U.S. markets have enjoyed the opportunity to sell into Mexican markets. So that's the beginning of it all. And now we're in a dispute under the USMCA, under the provisions of the USMCA, to try to resolve this issue. It's basically a matter of using non-scientific determinations to try to block U.S. imports into Mexico, and we're just not going to allow that to happen without going through the process.
Yeah. And Mexico's decree that bans the genetically modified corn, that causes a lot of uncertainty for U.S. farmers. Can you go into more on how the ban conflicts with the commitments that Mexico made under the USMCA, and what are some of the impacts if they don't start following what they agreed to?
Yeah, they could be in violation of the agreement because we negotiated the agreement in good faith. The agreement does not allow for them to use non-scientific reasoning to block importing American corn. And that's what they're doing. We know the science here. The science is solid. There's nothing about the corn that we produce here in the United States that is genetically inferior to products that are grown there. But this is, I think, a sort of side door way of having a protectionist policy that supports his growers. And here's the thing about that. If that were the Mexican goal at the outset of the trade negotiations, they should have put that on the table, that they wanted to have some protection for their growers. And then, of course, we would have said, okay, let's negotiate. If that's something you want, we want something for our growers in return. They didn't do that. They negotiated an agreement that required a scientific basis for them to make these sorts of decisions. Now they're using a basis that's not scientific to protect their growers. And to me, it just violates the agreement. So the effect would be that there could be a resolution of this through the dispute resolution process that establishes our right to sell our products just the way we protect their rights to sell products into the U.S. It's a two-way street, and they can't have it work to their benefit in one direction, but not to our benefit in the other direction. That's really what this is about.
Right. And then with the new administration coming in Mexico, does this complicate the issue at all? Or she did say when she was campaigning that she would be more science focused. Have we seen that yet? And how can the administration change in Mexico have an impact on this?
It could have an impact. Now, the new president, President Sheinbaum, is, close to President Lopez Obrador, but I have some indications that she may go her own path on this. And I think our message to her, and this is why Congressman Feenstra and I and others wrote to our trade representative, Catherine Tai, and Secretary Vilsack, the Agriculture Secretary, to press we want to make sure that she understands, look, this is an opportunity for her to carve her own path. And if she does intend to base her decision making on good science, of course, this objection that the former president had is something that she'll have to revisit. And we're going to encourage her to do that. We hope that she will. She could simply solve the problem by withdrawing their objection, ending the dispute resolution process, and accepting the importation into Mexico of our corn that growers have been producing, and put an end to it. But it remains to be seen whether she'll do that.
And then the USMCA does come up for review in 2026. That's more than a year away. Is it a matter of having to wait for the review in 2026 to really hold Mexico's feet to the fire, if you will, on treating the USMCA as to what they agreed to, or can more action be taken sooner?
I think we need to continue to press for enforcement under the existing language, and that's what the dispute resolution process is intended to do, and we've initiated that. That's underway. If it is the intent of the Mexican government to reopen certain provisions as a part of the review, that's up to them. They can do that, but they have to understand anything they ask for, if in any negotiation, there's a give and take. And what I'm concerned about is that at least the former president seemed to be sending the message that he'll take what he can from the U.S., but is only going to give what he wants to. And look, this has been a good implementation. I'm not trying to suggest that USMCA isn't working, but where we have our differences, we can't just fold. I'm doing this to defend our growers. We gave up certain, provisions, certain rights there in the USMCA. It's a give and take, but we don't want to be in a situation where we're providing access to our markets and they're denying access to theirs. And if they want to raise this during the review process, they're more than have the right to do so. But they're going to have to recognize that anything that they seek is going to have to come with some concessions on their part as well. And I'm hoping they'll understand that's not really going to be a successful attack for them. It's not going to be the right approach.
And during the dispute process, obviously the dispute process can take several months. What can American farmers expect during that process?
Unfortunately, it's a process of some uncertainty until this issue is resolved. And that's, of course, the concern that we've had from the very beginning. Their plan was to phase out the importation of U.S. corn. We're suggesting that they not do that they not take any action until this whole issue is resolved.
What would it mean to U.S. farmers if they did phase out the corn?
It would not be helpful. Obviously, we want to do what we can to support our growers, but it would potentially change the nature of the agreement with Mexico. It would be a step in the wrong direction for them. Let's put it that way. But again, if this is something that they continue to press, they have to understand that they can't negotiate agreement in good faith and then take away elements of that negotiation at their whim, based on a non-scientific conclusion that they've come to. So I'm hopeful that in the dispute resolution process, the facts will be revealed, that there's no scientific basis for the decision that the former president made, and that the current president will realize that and set aside this and allow us to continue on the path that we began a few years ago.
We're talking this morning with Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan. We will continue the conversation right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
We're talking with Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan about USMCA. And just for the sake of clarity, nothing in the science changed, right? From the time that the former president agreed to the USMCA to when they made their decision not to allow corn.
Nope, that's exactly right. There's nothing in the science changed. It's the same corn that was being exported during the process of negotiating the agreement. They knew everything they knew now, they knew then. And so I don't see that there's any justification other than simply trying to protect their own growers at the expense of ours. And again, in a free trade agreement where the two countries, in this case three, including Canada, come to a conclusion that we're best served by being able to access one another's markets, You can't have it both ways. They can't have access to our markets and then deny access to theirs.
And there are several people who signed on to this letter as well. And so it's got a, broad support. Obviously, is it helpful to have support from other Congress leaders across the nation as well?
For sure, particularly my friend Randy Feenstra. He and I are opposite parties. I'm a Democrat, he's a Republican, but we share this concern. And just like the USMCA itself, which was negotiated between the three countries, it had bipartisan support. The efforts to hold our trading partners to the letter of the law and the letter of the agreement, such as this effort, also has bipartisan support. A lot of people believe that bipartisanship is a thing of the past in Washington, but when it comes to protecting our growers and their access to markets with our trading partners, Democrats and Republicans coming together, and that's a good sign.
Yeah. With trade agreements like this, how important is it to constantly be making sure that all sides are upholding what they agreed to?
That's really the important thing about implementing a trade agreement. Coming to an agreement in the first place is difficult enough. But what we have to guard against is slipping back into old patterns and having a trade agreement that we adhere to, but that our trading partners might not fully adhere to, works against our industry. And so we need our businesses, our growers. And so we need to make sure that we not just sign the agreement, but we're vigilant in monitoring the implementation of these agreements and ensuring that what's written on the page is actually being adhered to in our daily, weekly, monthly, yearly trade with our trading partners. And that's really what this is all about. When they began, when the former president of Mexico began this process of trying to block the U.S. corn, that violated the agreement. And we can't just sit back and say, let's let this one pass. We can't do that. That's not good for our growers, and it undermines the agreement itself.
So what is the best outcome, let's say, from the letter, and just in general, what would be the best outcome from this?
I guess the couple of possible outcomes, obviously, one would be that the new president takes a look at many of the outstanding issues that were left behind and left incomplete with the transition in government, and decides, look, this is not a fight that they're going to win. Let's just withdraw this. The other possibility is that we go through the process, the science prevails, and we are able to continue to export our corn into Mexico. What I would hate to see happen is a more of a political determination where the process itself continues to result in Mexico or Canada or any of our trading partners trying to modify the terms of the agreement without being willing to go to the negotiating table to give something in order to get something in return.
Yeah. All right. Our time is just about up, and I don't want to keep you for longer than I said that I would. So do you have any final thoughts for Michigan's farmers or our listeners around the nation who this is a very important topic for?
Very important topic. We produce the best products in the world. Our growers do an amazing job of producing great products at a good price. And these trade agreements are intended to make sure that we have stable markets, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure they're enforced. It's what keeps the American farm family alive, and we're going to continue to fight for that.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Congressman Dan Kildee of Michigan. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
For this segment, we have an excerpt of the Voices of the Valley podcast.
Welcome to another edition of Voices of the Valley. I am today's host, Corey Lundy, Western Growers. I have my colleague, Brian Nickerson, also with Western Growers. Say hi.
Good afternoon.
And we have an incredible guest with us today, someone that I've known a long time. She is an advocate for the industry, and she is currently with the California Agricultural Leadership Foundation, Abby Taylor Silva.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Thank you for joining us. Today's conversation is going to be around leadership in the agriculture industry and what that means for the future of agriculture here in the state of California. And we know that the average age of farmers in the state has steadily risen over the years, and it's now near 60 years old. And we also know that fewer young people are going into agriculture. So we're at a point now where we need to continue cultivating and building up the next generation of leaders in the ag industry, and that's where the California Ag Leadership Foundation steps in. So, Abby, let's get to the bottom line. How do you define leadership, and why is leadership development important for the future of California agriculture?
I absolutely love this question. I love how we're just digging right in. And, I'm actually going to rely on Dr. Pat Latoury's definition to answer this question. So Dr. Latoury was a faculty member with our program for over 25 years, and he's really developed quite a bit of the curriculum for the program that we teach today. What he says is positive leadership is an art form, a teaching and serving process that envisions, influences, shapes, and enhances to the end that the leader and followers realize their goals for change within community. So to me, that's a very empowering answer to the question. I think a lot of times when we talk about leadership, we're thinking of someone who's a position holder, but that's not what leadership always is. A leadership is actually that individual who truly understands themselves as a leader, who then knows how to go into their community and positively lead change and movement toward a vision. And that's what this program's all about. This program's all about, too, knowing that leadership can be learned, which I think is very empowering for those of us in agriculture who come in and maybe feel like, gosh, do I have the skills? Do I have the skills to be part of this program, to do the things that I really want to do, to achieve what I think needs to be done? We all have natural strengths, but it's effective life experiences and self-awareness that truly help us to grow our potential. And that's what this program does. It really helps people to hone in on what those are, both what are the strengths they bring in and where can they grow, because we all have places we can grow.
Brian, kind of listening to Abby describe what leadership means to the Ag Leadership Program, you are an alumni, you went through the Ag Leadership Program. How did going through the program kind of shape your perception of leadership and what it meant to you as a person and what it means for agriculture as an industry?
Yeah. Great question, Corey. So I was chosen, had the ability to go through class 48, right? This is a 17-month program, and I always remember hearing about this program historically through my father, who was in class 13. And as we, look at that baby boomer generation, I really thought as a leader, as more of like an authoritative figure, somebody that made demands and really had high expectations on that individual. What I truly learned about myself and about different leaders through the Ag program is that empathy and self-awareness is as important than anything else, right? You think about all the different leadership skills that an individual has, think of it as like a toolbox, right? And you want to be able to call upon that proper tool at the right time. We all know if you use the wrong tool in the wrong situation, you're not going to get the right outcome, right? So it's pulling out the right tool at the right time and understanding yourself inside and out and where your skill sets lies.
I like that, the focus on empathy and self-awareness in your own leadership journey. That's terrific. Abby, why is leadership development important for the future of California agriculture?
Right, so I think I've seen in some of your communications that the percentage of the population that grows our food is 1.5% of all people in the United States. And so we're further removed than we've ever been from the people who are growing our food. And so I think ag leadership helps people to learn how to use their tools and lead in various realms. And I think those realms can include their businesses. So we need people who they're going to need to run their businesses in such a way where they can feed the nation and the world, right? That's really actually very aligned to our vision, is feeding the world. The challenges that companies face today are more complex than ever. So we need people who can come in, who have the leadership to navigate those complexities, make hard decisions, cast vision, inspire their teams, and really effectively sustain their operations. I believe we also need strong agricultural leaders in our communities, right? So I live here in Salinas. If I look at the people who are serving on county boards, sponsor Little League, 4-H community leaders, sit on nonprofit boards, all of those are agriculturalists. Those are the people that are lifting the community. And I think the agriculturalists of today also must interact with organizations, legislators, regulators, special interest groups, and more who don't understand agriculture in California or agriculture at all. And so we need leaders who can step up and step into those hard conversations and tell their story effectively, find the opportunities for change, and make it happen. And that is what this program provides. I think it really provides people with the roadmap to learn how to do those things.
I think what Abby's really tying in here is someone's ability to be impactful and intentful, right? Everyone can have an idea about whatever impact that they want to lead, but that intent, right? The right intent with the right impact, as those two parallel each other, is truly what will get you to that leadership capability, right? And having that ability to have that self-awareness to know when to call upon that is truly as important.
Yeah, and Abby, your point about agriculture needing to engage with their communities. As you mentioned, fewer and fewer people are engaged in agriculture, and they simply don't understand the needs of the industry and how the industry relates to the community around it. So it's imperative that as part of any leadership exercise, the agriculturalist needs to consider having an impact on their community and not just on their farm or in their farming community, but in the community at large.
Yeah, I would argue, there are boards that I've sat on that are not agricultural in focus. They're more community focused. And in some ways, those are just as impactful as the ag boards I've sat on, because you need to have ag voice in making major decisions around your community, right? And I think that's part of what comes from this program, is learning how to do that.
Yeah, and if it's not us telling the story, who is it, right? And is that the right story? Can never trust those sources, so you are your best advocate. You are the one that promote the best message because you're the one that understands it, and you have the ability as a leader to bring others onto your farm, so to speak, and make sure that they understand the intricacies.
This is the AgNet News Hour, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Wrapping up the day today with some news. What is the connection between the proposed restart of a nuclear power plant, clean energy production, and a USDA program? Rod Bain looks into it.
The recommission of a nuclear power plant in Michigan. The announcement by Energy Department Deputy Secretary David Turk.
The Department of Energy will close our $1.52 billion loan guarantee to Holtec Palisades to support the recommissioning of the Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan. This is the first time in American history that a nuclear plant will be restarted.
Restarted to meet zero-emission energy demands.
We expect to see a net demand increase of about 15% on the grid over the next few years, thanks in part to AI and data centers, but also to the manufacturing renaissance that we're seeing all across the United States.
And in terms of economic and energy potential,
the plant will support 600 jobs in Covert Township in Michigan and provide 800 megawatts of clean, firm power, or enough for 800,000 homes.
Now, one might wonder how a project involving a nuclear power facility connects with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. As Deputy Agriculture Secretary Xochitl Torres-Small explains,
over $1.3 billion in Inflation Reduction Act investments. That breaks down to over $650 million to Wolverine Power Cooperative and over $675 million to Hoosier Energy.
Under Rural Development's Empowering Rural America New Era program.
On the USDA portion, the funding is going directly to the Wolverine Power Cooperative and Hoosier Energy, which then will use those funds to complete the power purchase to Palisades. And so this is part of that capital stack that allows for the demand necessary to restart Palisades. It also is going to support the consumers at both of those rural electric cooperatives.
That consumer support is illustrated this way.
As nonprofit rural electric cooperatives, both will pass 100% of their New Era grant funds directly to the homes and businesses served by their member electric cooperatives. This means that every dollar will go straight to the communities they serve, and that will help reduce wholesale power costs, provide community benefits, and keep electricity reliable and affordable.
The Palisades nuclear plant must first go through various permitting and regulatory processes, as well as an upgrade to modern technologies. That should place its restart and energy distribution to begin in a couple of years. That according to DOE representatives. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
USDA is putting the final touches to data collecting for the upcoming crop production forecasts. Gary Crawford has more.
Farmers and traders may not have the certainty of a farm bill to help shape the market, but they will at least soon have a very good idea of the size of this season's crops.
Because now we're starting to really get into focus with what's happening, especially with the corn and soybeans.
And that focus will be in the form of this coming Friday's USDA crop production forecast. Lance Honig with USDA Statistics Service says that will be based partly on yield surveys of thousands of farmers.
And so we're asking them to tell us, what do you expect your yields to be? Or if harvest is already underway, what are the yields that you're seeing?
USDA will back that up by sending experts into thousands of field plots.
They're actually taking counts, measurements, and at this point in the year, they're actually harvesting portions of those plots, sending them to our lab in St. Louis where we can get a measure of yield.
Honig says add to that, there's data from satellites as well, all feeding into a new USDA crop forecast coming this Friday, noon Eastern Time. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.